All right, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Engagement Orientation, Empowering Your Staff to Build Community. So I will introduce our presenter here in just a minute, but before we dive in, there are, of course, just a few housekeeping items that we need to go over. So first, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay silent. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, go ahead and type it into that Q&A box there in your control panel. We'll kind of monitor those throughout the webinar, but I think what we're going to do is hold everything until the end. We'll leave plenty of time to answer all of your questions then. Next, live captioning is available for today's webinar, and you can access those captions by clicking on the closed captioning icon and selecting Show Subtitle. If you have audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. And please keep in mind that because we are presenting from our homes, there may be some slight variations in bandwidth or internet stability. So if the sound fluctuates or one of us freezes up for a minute, thank you in advance for bearing with us. I promise we will try and keep on rolling through anything like that. And finally, we are recording this webinar, and the recording will be available on our webinars page at oac.ohio.gov/webinars and on our YouTube channel by early next week. All right, I think that does it for housekeeping items. So with that, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to today's presenter, Dr. Kathleen Riemenschneider, who is here to help us learn all about engagement orientation. Kathleen has developed and managed arts education and community engagement programs for 25 years. She's trained in the art of community engagement and serves on the Community Engagement Network Advisory Board. She founded the Cincy Emerging Arts Leaders in 2006 and has served on boards of directors and committees for nonprofit organizations such as Price Hill Arts Connection, Greater Cincinnati Alliance for Arts Education, Marjorie Book Continuing Education, the National Alumni Association for the Cincinnati School for Creative and Performing Arts, No Theater Tribe, and Cincinnati Zen Center. That is quite a resume, Kathleen. We are so glad to have you with us today. I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Katie, and I would like to thank the Ohio Arts Council for inviting me to do this presentation. As Katie mentioned, I have worked with doing community engagement programs for a number of years, and I've also got a doctorate in leadership studies. So during my leadership studies program, they talked a lot about employee engagement. So I was kind of curious if there's a connection between employee engagement and community engagement. And I did find one study that they talked about customer engagement, and I'll go into more details about that study. But just kind of a brief overview that both employee engagement, community engagement, customer engagement, these are all what would be termed 21st century terms, because really in the last 20 years, they've been like discussed and studied, and people are kind of exploring how to implement them. And then the study, Kumar and Pansori, that talked about employee engagement and customer engagement, they coined this term engagement orientation, which really means developing policies that focus on ensuring that all strategies of an organization focuses on engaging customers and employees, maximizing values for all stakeholders. Just a one note, I use the term staff. I'm using that very broadly. It could be paid staff, both full-time and part-time. It could be contracted artists. It could be volunteers. All arts organizations kind of have a mixture of all those in different capacities. So kind of think about it in terms of your own organization. So on the screen is the outline for today. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Kumar and Pansori's study and how employee engagement and what they term customer engagement, we're talking about community engagement here, that relationship. I'm going to go into a little more detail about what employee engagement is. We haven't, in my experience in the arts, talked a lot about that, so I'll kind of give you more background. And then a study I did was on institutionalizing community engagement. So I'll talk about that, but I also will talk about how strategies of employee engagement can help institutionalize community engagement. And then I'm going to talk briefly about COVID-19 since we are still dealing with it and how it kind of affects this whole process. Up until that point, I'm kind of talking about it in an idealized way. So, and then I'll give a brief recap. I have a list of the references of the studies I referred to. We are going to make a copy of this presentation available to you, so Katie will email that out to you. And then at the end, we will have our Q&A. So, employee engagement, customer community engagement, relationship. So the Kamar and Pansori study looked at, they looked at a for-profit organization, and they started the study because they found that in general, highly engaged employees believe they could positively affect the quality of the organization's product and its customer service. So they were kind of exploring that relationship more. And they did kind of find employee engagement leads to customer engagement. Customer engagement can also be defined as like brand loyalty, or, you know, when you have customers who refer other people to your organization, that kind of word of mouth does lead to, now they looked at sales and profit, which is typical when you're looking at for-profit organizations. That's often how they measure organizations' performance. So if we want to look at this more in terms of nonprofit arts view, so we would have employee engagement, and I divided it between audience engagement and community engagement. Audience engagement usually refers to engaging your current audience. So doing extra programs, like maybe if you have a performance, you know, pre-show events before your performance, you know, doing more things to engage your current audience. Community engagement is about working with the community to develop programs. Often you're targeting members of the community who aren't part of your audience. Now I put a double arrow between the two. They do tend to overlap. You know, in an ideal world, your audience would look like your community. And also, once you start doing community engagement programs, those, you know, participants do become part of your audience. So there's overlap. They kind of engage with each other. And then organizational performance, you can kind of measure for arts organizations. There are 4 objectives most organizations try to meet. There's the artistic, financial, market, which is usually consumer based, and social, which is the community engagement programs, the education programs. There are 2 studies that are in the list. They kind of couldn't fit on the screen here. Radborn and Voss, Cable and Voss talk about those 4 objectives if you're more interested in that. So obviously audience engagement kind of goes to the market objective, community engagement to the social, but it doesn't hurt to kind of think about the artistic and the financial objectives when you're doing these programs. Oops. Oh, there are the 2 studies. Okay, so employee engagement, a lot of researchers talk about it in terms of 3 levels of engagement. They were developed by Gallup, and actually the bottom of your screen is a website, Gallup's website, and they have a lot of articles on employee engagement. So the first level is disengaged, and these are employees who are not connected to the work organization. They may have a pessimistic attitude. High absenteeism is often an indicator of disengagement, and the work may not be done in a timely manner. If it gets done, sometimes it's not getting done. So those are like employees that they're there, but they're really not engaging. The next one is called not engaged. Now these are the employees who do the minimum. They come to work, get the work done, and leave. They may not have a lot of enthusiasm for the work, but it is getting done. And then the engaged one, and this is really what we're trying to get the employees into, this engaged. And these are kind of described as, you know, employees who go above and beyond. They show connection to the work and the organization. They may be very passionate about the work, have affinity for the organization, are loyal to the organization. So a lot of times when studies are looking at employee engagement, they're kind of looking at how to get the non-engaged to the engaged. It is a little harder to get disengaged to the non-engaged. So usually that's what is the focus. Okay, this person's doing the minimum. How do we get them to that more engaged level? So some strategies. This is one study. It's by Young, Roscoe, and Shuck. This is a recent study that was published last year, and I selected it because they looked at all the other studies of employee engagement and came up with this taxonomy of resources. So how to do employee engagement. So the idea of resources is this, that, employees are trying to obtain, retain resources to do the job for their well-being. There's a lot of negotiation between employee and employer about resources, which could be anything from office supplies to pay to time off, learning opportunities, etc. So, and then they kind of define the resources a little bit more. So you have what the organization can provide. So, in organizational climate and culture is part of that. Reward and recognition. Reward also includes the pay and benefits, learning and development opportunities, the policies and services, and the leadership of the organization can all contribute to how employees are engaged. Social resources get into the supervisor and colleague support, team support, also the employees' network outside of the organization, how supportive they are of what the employees doing. And that also can include like colleagues at other organizations or at national organizations. Job resources, skill variety. Is an employee doing the same thing all the time? Are they doing lots of different things? The extreme, and sometimes the two extremes could be kind of start disengaging employees. They could be overwhelmed by doing too many different things, but they can be bored by doing the same thing. So it's kind of finding that right mix of skill variety. Task identity is this, how clear is it what the employee is doing? Do they understand what their job is, what they're supposed to be doing within their job? Task significance kind of gets into the importance of what they're doing. Do they understand why they're doing what they're doing? Autonomy is this giving the employees some control over their work, and the amount of control can kind of vary from job to job, and maybe they have more control in some areas than others. It kind of depends on what they're doing. And then feedback, and this is like critical feedback. It's the idea is to help the employee grow and develop in their job, and this can be coupled with the learning and development opportunities. These last two resources are more what the employee bring to the work environment. So their home resources. Do they have support at home? Arts organizations, we often work odd hours. Is that supported by their home life, or is that kind of in conflicting with their home life, that whole work-home balance? And then their personal resources, their cognitive, psychological, and physical makeup. Also the career, their personal goals are how adaptable they are to career changes. So I want to talk briefly about meaning and purpose. There is like a whole area of study about how employees want meaning and purpose in their work. But this is also an area that kind of overlaps with community engagement. So if you read The Art of Relevance, that's really what her book is about, is like creating programs that are meaningful to the community. Young, Roscoe, and Shuck talk about when employees perceive that their work has meaningfulness to others, they tend to commit to the work. So they want to know that this goes into the task significance, that this is important. I'm affecting others, I'm having an impact. Meaning making is just a term that a lot of researchers use to describe the process by which individuals, communities make meaning of our experiences. And Young, Roscoe, and Shuck talk about how these resources that we've been talking about are meaning-making devices that can create engagement, but they can also foster disengagement if, depending on how they're implemented within the organization. So the challenge when we're talking about community engagement is helping staff who are not directly involved with community engagement. How does that affect their jobs? How does their job affect community engagement, and kind of helping them understand that. Okay, so institutionalizing community engagement. I did a study that the impetus for this was both American Alliance for Museums and Doug Borick in their writings have talked about all staff must embrace community engagement for it to work within an organization. So my question was, what does that look like? You know, how does an organization get the whole staff committed to it? So I did a case study. So of course, this is one organization. There might be some variation with other organizations, but I came up with a list of factors that help institutionalize the community engagement. On this list, you'll see in brackets, it says EE colon, then I list the employee engagement resources that help support that factor. So I'm going to go through each one of these individually to kind of talk about in more detail. Excuse me a moment. So the first one is open to ideas from anyone. So it's just not the leader at the top or the person in charge of community engagement who's coming up with ideas for community engagement programs or projects, that an intern, volunteer, senior leadership, the middle managers, really anyone can submit ideas. Now you want to have leadership within the organization that one communicates that all ideas are welcome from anyone. But also kind of think about what is the mechanism for submitting ideas and to discuss those ideas. And you really kind of, when you're discussing the ideas, want to include the person who submitted the idea in some of those discussions. It's good for them to hear other people's views on their idea and kind of like maybe tweak the idea. I mean, and leadership also needs to act upon the ideas. Now, this isn't about, oh, we have to accept every idea submitted. It's okay to say no, but when you say no, you want to acknowledge the submission of the idea and that it does have potential, and probably state why at this time you can't do the idea. And it could be like, maybe we'll revisit that in a year or two. So that's the leadership. Social resources. If you have a diverse employee base, I'm not really talking about diversity and equity inclusion in this presentation, but diverse employees bring diverse networks outside the organization. And usually when you're doing community engagement programs, it helps to be able to connect to different resources outside the organization. It also helps to have supervisor and colleague support to support the ideas submitted. Job resources, autonomy. This is giving your employees some autonomy to come up with the ideas of possible programs. It can contribute to their skill variety, or because all employees have their strengths and weaknesses, that they might be seeing something, using their skills to see something new within the organization or the community. And again, task significance. Why it's probably, this idea probably has meaning for them. It might have meaning for their job. So the next factor is community partners, and it is good to identify, create, and maintain partnerships within community members and organizations. Again, social resource, so team support. Now it's kind of getting more in the mode of seeing the arts organization community partner as working as a team, that you're supporting each other. Network outside the organization, that this kind of helps build those community partnerships. Who has what connections? A lot of times when we're talking about community engagement, we tend to use the term building a bridge to the community or something like that. One thing I found interesting in the case study I did is they had worked so much within certain communities that if they were in that community and they were just going out to lunch, people in the community recognized them, that they had started to become more a member of the community. You know, people were saying hi to them on the streets, recognizing them, you know, saying, I just love that program you did the other night. So it's kind of like you're building those outside networks to actually become part of that network. Job resources, again, skill variety. The community partner can bring a set of skills that your organization might not have. And that's maybe one thing you consider when you're looking at community partners. Also task identity, who's doing what, that maybe the community partner takes, you know, does certain aspects of the program and the arts organization does some other aspects. Again, task significance, why is it important to both organizations? So the next one is collaborative decision making, and this happens both within the organization and externally. So especially like when you're like someone submits an idea, it's good to get a lot of different viewpoints on that idea, multiple perspectives. When you're working with a community partner, that really you're making decisions together about a program. Again, leadership, there's been a lot of terms, team leadership, collective leadership, also I think shared and distributed leadership or other leadership types that really, again, those are 21st century concepts that more and more researchers are looking into. Okay, it's not just about one person leading, how can a group of people or a couple people lead? These type of leaderships also tend to disperse power within and outside the organization. So it's not like the arts organization has the final say on everything. If you're working with community partner, it's really kind of something you decide together. In terms of social research, team support. So if you're working as a team, you know, you're working together and make decisions. Again, getting to the outside networks outside the organization to help create that support. Skill variety. Different staff members have different skill strengths, and when they are all included in that decision-making process, they really do bring that multiple perspectives and see things in different ways. And then finally, variety of ways to communicate. We have so many options nowadays, and everyone has their preference. Do they want it in person? Do they call? Do they text? Do they email? We have Zoom, we've been all using a lot. But when you're making decisions, you kind of want to take that in consideration, not to do things all in one form of communication. You might want to like break it up a bit or realize that what other people's preferences are, which actually goes into the next factor, which is communication. This is both within the organization and externally. Basically, the goal is to make sure everyone's clear on what to expect, what the measures of success are, who's doing what, all that information. Leadership is very important in this. As I was studying leadership, I realized that a lot of what leaders do is communication, just kind of making sure the right people have the right information they need, and kind of, and in terms of community engagement, they're connecting community engagement to the organization's mission, values, and goals, and making sure the staff understands how community engagement is part of the mission, values, and goals. Also for each project, making the goals and measures success of communicate. And of course, communication is two-way, so leaders need to take the time to listen to others. This goes back to the collaborative decision-making, that, you know, everyone has different perspectives and to kind of listen to all those. And job resources, it's again, various modes of communication, skill variety, task identity, making it clear who's doing what, task significance, why important. This kind of clarifies the goals, why they're important, and of course, you know, receiving feedback both internally and externally. So the next factor is continual program evaluation. As the adage goes, the only constant is change. And even though you've developed a program with the community, you want to kind of check in to make sure it's still like addresses the interest of the community, that is still something the community is interested in doing. And if you kind of measures of success, are you continuing to meet those measures of success, or do you need to update what your measures of success are? Just general resources. Do you have adequate resources? Did you have a resource that maybe is no longer available? Who contributes what? Both the arts organization and community partner can contribute resources now. As happened, maybe there's a change in your community partner organization that could affect what they can contribute, and arts organizations also have that go on, you know, their status change, also what they have available changes. In terms of organizational resources, the rewards and recognition, recognize the programs, give credit when credit is due, recognize the partner and everyone involved. It also helps to review your policies and services. Are they supportive of this type of program? Are there some policies or services that actually are running counter to your programming, and there's kind of like that conflict, and so you need to review that and work it out. All evaluation is a process of learning development. recognize when it helps to know when you screwed up or when something didn't go well. That can be a learning opportunity. So, the evaluation, helps you kind of understand like, okay, what didn't work and why didn't it work? And that happens to all of us. And then feedback. This is important. You want to make sure your measures of success were being met, and you want feedback from the community. Now, there's a couple different ways you can get feedback from the community. Most of us are familiar with surveys. Keep in mind with surveys, so you can reach a lot of people, but you tend to only get surface level information. So another strategy is to talk to the community. If you have a community partner, you're definitely talking to them, evaluating the program with them, getting their feedback. Depending on the type of program you're doing, you want to get feedback from the participants. Sometimes you can do it when the program is going on. Again, it depends on the program. It's hard. Like if you're in a performance, you're not going to interrupt them while they're watching the performance, but maybe at intermission, you can ask a few people. If you have a reception or a meet and greet are also good opportunities to talk to members. If they're doing activities, sometimes you can kind of talk to them as they're doing the activity. Kind of getting back into skill variety, and everyone has their strengths. If you have an employee who's very good at talking to strangers, at starting these conversations, this is the job for them. You can get them involved in this kind of approaching people. You can think of questions to ask, like give you measures of success. So you can say, okay, we want to find out if, base your questions on those, and then kind of, maybe have a couple questions pre-ready when you go talk to people. The other one is observation. You can just observe how people are interacting at your program. You can kind of tell, are they happy? Are they enjoying themselves? Do they seem frustrated? Take note of those. And the important thing with talking to the community in observation, take the time to write your notes down. Maybe have some system like a folder on your drive or something like, here are some observations from the program. Those kind of help you evaluate how the program's doing. Okay. So the next one is having stories of impact. And this is really why you have to talk to the participants. You're not going to get stories of impact from surveys. This is really having that conversation with participants. Now, you probably won't be able to talk to every participant, but if you can talk to a couple of them, you'll probably get a couple stories that will really help you kind of communicate the importance of the program. And you really want to kind of see how the programs impacted both the community, but also your organization, and what is the impact on your organization. Of course, recognition and rewards. Really acknowledge employees, volunteers, community members' efforts to make the program successful. Hopefully it is a successful program. Recognize when it is a successful program. I know working in arts organizations, we finish one program, then we're on to the next one, and kind of we have to remind ourselves to take that moment like, oh, that really did work. It did meet our expectations, and having, taking that moment to recognize the programs. Social resources, stories and impact can help build support within your team, within like supervisors and colleagues, also with your network outside your organization. So you want to share those stories with all of those, and also with funders and who are the funders for the programs. And then job resources. These stories of impact does kind of help say why it's important, and then it's a form of feedback. So and of course the money. This was the one factor that I think everyone discussed. I interviewed for my case study. In the case organization, a lot of their community engagement programs were free or low cost, so of course they had to have funding to help cover the cost of the program. They also talked about making sure the programs are in the organizational budget, that it's just part of what you do year after year. So resources, If you have a community partner, you can think about what they can contribute. This is part of the discussion, part of the decision-making discussions you have with them. You don't want to be a burden, but they may be able to contribute resources, even if it's in-kind resources. The other one that came up is aligning funders' interests with community interests. Now, funders have their ideas about how they want to impact the community. We all know funders tend to make up a certain demographic, and often the community we're working with is a different demographic. This is where the stories of impact really help. The case study they talked about, well, having those stories, we could go back to the funders and it helped explain to the funders why this was important to the community, how it impacted the community. And then social resources, kind of think about if, creating a team to do these community engagement programs. And that team not only are members on your staff, but they are also your community partners, the funders, they all kind of make up that team. And so it helps get the support from the funders. And also those networks outside the organization, staff members have connections, and that might help find new funders, especially if they have a connection to the community you're also working with. So the big one, staff and artists are committed to community engagement. Ideally, when you hire people, they do have that commitment, but to help build that commitment, leadership, again, needs to express to both staff and artists how community engagement connects to the mission, values, and goals of the organization. So it's part of what their organization does. Also the learning and development opportunities. You also want to give everyone in your staff and your artists training on community engagement that will help them understand how to maximize, doing those programs. Now, to do training, there's a couple different ways you could do that. There is external. For example, I know Doug Borick does do online trainings. They're more extensive. They're like multi-session trainings or via Zoom. There is a cost involved with that. He is also training people to be trainers. So I've been trained to be a trainer in community engagement. I know there's one other person in Ohio I definitely know about who also went through that training. So we're available if you want someone a little closer. Internal trainer, if you have someone on your staff who's done a lot of community engagement, they could, see what their preferences. Maybe they could come up with a formal program, or maybe they can just give an informal discussion about community engagement to the staff. And that kind of gets into the cross-training. Cross-training is a concept that a lot of corporations use. What they do is they'll take an employee and put that person in another division or another, if they have more than one office, another office, just so they can get an idea of other aspects of the organization. Arts organizations were pretty tight staffed, and it's hard to have that luxury of oh, go work in this other job for a year. But you can do some informal kind of cross training. It goes into that again, maybe having the community engagement person who's leading those programs talk to other departments or other staff members, explain what they're doing with community engagement and how it works within the organization. You can also do a job shadowing, maybe allow staff to spend a day with the community engagement department or help out with the community engagement program, even though it's not directly related to what they do. Maybe they can help staff that program and help. So those are a couple, kind of more informal ways to do it. Another option I was thinking about is if you have another organization in your area and you really like what they're doing with community engagement, have a discussion with them. Maybe one of their staff members would be willing to come to your organization and talk about what they do with community engagement and kind of how they develop their programs. And then task significance. Again, I talked about this a little earlier about how does everyone's job within the organization impacts community engagement. So of course, when you start talking about staff and artists, you always have to talk, what is their capacity? That does happen. We all have a lot on our plate when we work in arts organizations, and it's oh, how do I, include this also? So the case organization I looked at, they decided that for their artists, they didn't want a two-tiered system. They didn't want to hire artists to do the main stage performance and then another set of artists to do the community engagement performance. So in order to do that, to have the same artists do both, they did have to look at the schedule that like, okay, if these artists are in rehearsal, we can't schedule a community engagement program at that time. So they had a lot of adjustment with scheduling and time available. The same thing can happen with staff. If they're working, multiple things are going on, how much time do they have to be involved with community engagement? Now, this is when the social resources start to come in, the network outside the organization. Again, if you have a community partner, maybe they can help with some of the capacity issues that they're doing certain tasks, so it's not all on your staff or your artists. Again, colleague, supervisor support, and team support. Maybe it's more like you look at what's on everyone's plate, and maybe there's some shuffling of who's doing what or when people are doing certain things. These are just kind of some of the strategies, because you really do want to make sure a staff person has the capacity to work on it if they want to work on community engagement. And one thing to keep in mind, if it's someone's ideas, they can kind of find, they really want to do that program if it's like accepted. So, they're going to want to find that capacity. Sometimes people can find the capacity. And one of the ways to do it is we talk about autonomy, giving people the autonomy to organize their work. And if they have that, sometimes they can find capacity that isn't obvious to a supervisor. Again, and then we're also getting to skill variety, who's like, be the capacity, like how much variety do they have within their jobs, and doing community engagement could kind of help with that variety. And then a task identity, who's doing what. So those are all the factors. I'm just going to talk a brief bit about COVID-19 and how it has a kind of affects some of this process. So it may have felt like for the past year, almost a year and a half now, a lot of people are not engaged, that they're not doing those above and beyond. Now keep in mind, non-engaged was defined as doing the minimum, just doing the minimum. Well, part of the challenge for going through right now is the minimum requirements have changed and they're continuing to change. So when a lot of places were shut down, that changed like how everyone did their job. Now we're kind of in this phase where we're starting to reopen, but now there's a lot of different changes with mask mandates with the CDC. So, we're kind of still figuring out what exactly we're doing. So it's hard to be highly engaged when you're just trying to figure out what needs to be done, the bare minimum. And just kind of keep in mind in general, whenever an employee is going through some kind of transition, that they might slip from an engaged to not engaged just because they're trying to figure everything out. They're trying to figure out what the requirements are. This happens whenever someone goes into learning mode, that they kind of step back a little bit, kind of just figure out, okay, this is what I need to be doing, this is how I need to be doing it. And then once they figure that out, they can kind of go back into a more engaged mode. Another contributing factor is our work life has merged with our home life. So that home work balance has been kind of rewritten, and starting March 2020, we had to like refigure it out, and now a lot of people going back into the office. We're starting to reopen, so people are kind of like making those adjustments again. It's kind of like once people figure that out, they can kind of shift back into a more engaged mode. And then also COVID-19, we all know it has affected us psychologically, physically. There's been a lot of talk on the internet about everyone's just feeling blah, like it's just like, they're just trying to get through stuff physical, that, a lot more people are like stuck at home in front of the computer versus when you're doing events. A lot of times, I know whenever I did an event, I was up on my feet all the time and walking around and, interacting. So it has kind of affected us in those areas. Also career, it's hard to kind of like define what your career goals are right now, because we're not kind of sure what we can do and when we will be able to do our programs and how we'll be able to do our programs. So those are kind of affecting how people think about their jobs. And unfortunately, I think nationwide, about 60% of the people in the arts have been laid off. So they've kind of had to really rethink their career. And laid off staff, by definition, are disengaged staff, that they're no longer connected to the organization. It's kind of like that forced disconnect. But as you think about it, you can, you kind of think, well, how do we keep them connected with our organization? They are now members of the community. So it's, what's that relationship? Do you plan to rehire them? Now, keep in mind, depending on how long they've been laid off, their life has gone through some changes. And so they're not going to be able to pick up right where they left off. They probably need some reorientation, but this is also a good opportunity during these orientations to talk about community engagement and how the organization wants to include community engagement and what the focus is. Okay, so a recap, just organizations' mission, values, goals should be connected to community engagement. You want the whole staff committed to it, and doing employee engagement or strategies to use to engage people. You want each staff member to understand how their job is connected, not only to the organization's mission, values, and goals, but also to and how their jobs can impact community engagement. If you're doing training and community engagement, the whole staff should receive that at some level. And then just kind of think about these strategies of employee engagement and how they can help staff to understand and engage in community engagement. Okay, so this is the list of references. Like I mentioned, we will be providing a copy of this to everyone. So if you want to delve more into some of these concepts. And then, okay, so questions. I don't know, Katie, if there's been any questions.
Sure. Thanks so much, Kathleen. That was a lot of really great information. I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have questions, you can go ahead and type them in the Q&A box there in your control panel. We'll try our best to get to everything. If people do have questions, feel free to jump in. I thought that there were a few really interesting points that I found really interesting. And I think one that is really key, especially maybe not so much in a smaller organization where everyone kind of has their hands into everything, but maybe in a larger organization, really making it clear to employees who may not be the front-facing folks who are out there in the community, but having it be clear, their role that they have in engagement. I think that plays a huge role in feeling purposeful. Sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, I'm just the person who sits here in the cubicle or whatever, and I don't really matter. But yes, everyone is connected, and I think making sure people understand that is so key. So I really enjoyed that point. Communication, again, communication is key, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know it can sometimes be challenging. It's like, well, the receptionists, how are they involved with, it might not be direct involved, but their work can be supportive of the community engagement department, depending on how they help the rest of the staff. So yeah, and sometimes you kind of just have to step back, like if you're the community engagement person, well, how does that, well, you might even just want to compliment some of the other staff that have been supportive of you. The accounting staff, I knew our accounting staff I'm always amazed at how much they had to do, and just just even paying the bills, that's very supportive. I just know I didn't have to worry about it. They were taking care of all that. So yes, so I think sometimes it's kind of taking that time to acknowledge the rest of the staff and how they support what you do, even though it's not a direct support, it's directly community engagement, but their work does help.
Absolutely, for sure. Somebody was asking about your case study, your 2020 case study, and I'm pretty sure I saw the link to that in your list of resources at the end of the PowerPoint. Was I correct in seeing that that's in there?
Yeah, it is on the references. I did put it on the references. It was a dissertation, so if you go through a dissertation data bank, probably Google Scholar, you can probably look it up. Or,
Okay, fantastic. And
Or
just
just
for the
email me, if all else fails, I can always send you a PDF of it.
fantastic.
Yeah,
And
but
I
my
just wanted to
email is
remind,
here, so if you have other questions afterwards, yeah.
and we will share a copy of the PowerPoint presentation with
Yeah.
everyone who registered for today's webinar. So we'll be sending that around either tomorrow or Monday. So you can look for, you'll be able to copy that there. But yeah, again, Kathleen's email is right here. So we appreciate your willingness to answer questions. We do have another question. Let's see. Are there best practices that you can share that help with new employee engagement during the onboarding process or immediately after? That's a good one.
Yeah, so with new employees, I mean, keep in mind they are in that learning mode, so they're getting a lot of information at once. And this kind of like, I think with new employees, you kind of might gauge like what are their interests, because usually if you can connect with their interests in some ways, maybe that's where kind of sometimes like the autonomy, like understand how they like to work, kind of helps employees like sometimes the supervisors get in the habit, like we want things done in a certain ways. I know sometimes they do have to be done in a certain ways, just like databases are like one of those examples, but maybe kind of figure out like, how does the employee like to work, what kind of their strengths, like once you start understanding that, you can kind of help use their strengths to make them more engaged in what they're doing. So yeah, there's no like one way to engage employees. Part of it's getting to know the employee and kind of understanding, okay, this is what they see as meaningful, what they see is like, obviously when you're interviewing employees, you want to know like why they want to work for your organization, and kind of like keep that in mind and kind of connect that to their job, like kind of make those connections like, oh, you find this important, well, this is why we're doing this. And kind of a lot of times, like once employees understand why they're doing what they're doing, it helps them engage more instead of saying, do it this way.
My mute button was stuck there. Sorry.
That's okay.
So you talked earlier about, being open to ideas from everyone. Do you have any kind of recommendations for best practices as to how to go about doing that? Do you have a monthly meeting? Do you have a suggestion box? Is there, how often do you do that? And yeah.
I would say have a point person. Now, if you have someone with the title of community engagement, they would probably be the point person and say, submit your ideas to this person. That's probably the best way, is like make sure people know. And maybe, every year when you start discussing next year's programming, maybe at a staff meeting, say, does anyone have any ideas about other community engagement programs we could be doing? It's kind of like program evaluation, like, okay, these are what we're doing. You're kind of evaluating if they're still, relevant to the community. But there's always that point where you should be asking like, well, what else could we be doing? And maybe that is at a staff meeting. Again, I would say have like that point person. Well, okay, if you have ideas, talk to this person first, and then and this kind of thing about, and it kind of depends on how large the organization is. I mean, a lot of smaller organizations, it's very easy to do. You could, the whole staff is in a staff meeting versus large organizations where each department has a staff meeting, so it might go through a few more layers. And so you kind of want to think about what is that process, what works best within your organization.
Yes. And then I know you mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate in case people were wondering. You mentioned that you are obviously trained in the art of community engagement. If people would like to bring in an outside trainer, if they're looking for additional resources, would it be okay if folks reached out to you regarding that information?
Yeah, they can just email me. And like, I do also want to mention the, I think I did mention the Community Engagement Network does do kind of monthly meetings. They haven't been meeting in the summer, and like December they didn't meet, but those are kind of more topic informal discussions, and it's via Zoom, so you can kind of connect with people across the United States about what are some strategies they have. They've been kind of doing some topics, but it's a good discussion. basically how it works is we go into breakout rooms. So there's like usually like 4 or 5 people discussing together, and we come back together and kind of rehash what everyone talked about. So that's a good, like, just informal way to get kind of training, just kind of connect with other people and kind of pick their brains. But yeah, I can also, if you're interested in Doug Borwick's kind of more, he has like a very like multi-session kind of very formal, it includes reading. So yeah, it's kind of much more like a course in community engagement, which I can also give you that information.
Great. Okay. I don't think we have any other questions. This was, somebody commented, thank you. Great information, very thorough. And I have to agree, this was a lot of really great information. I'm looking forward to diving into. Oh, we have one more question. I was going to say, I'm looking forward to diving into all of your resources. Let's see here. So, how do you get employees to communicate with today's technology, the old school workflow versus today's workflow?
Yes, I mean, in some ways we have like abundance of way to communicate. I mean, like, you know, I think recently a lot of people have been doing like Zoom or Slack, and I mean, sometimes like getting people together in a room or Zoom. I mean, I've known people is like, I don't really like working on Zoom. Yeah, again, it's kind of like to gauge employees. Like, there are some generational difference. Like, you know, some of the younger generations like, oh yeah, Slack, fine, they're on there, and the older ones are like, no, I want to do more in person. I think that's kind of one of those things. Like, kind of just kind of ask your employees, how do they feel comfortable communicating, and then, you know, you can kind of maybe set up, if you have a lot of variety, maybe do one meeting one way, one another way, or, you know, there's like so many options now. Sometimes it is a little overwhelming. So it is a bit of like just kind of engaging your employees, see what they respond to. Like,
For sure. And I think, again, I think that all kind of comes back to that communication, right? I know that we've talked a lot at the OAC. We've been going through some trainings there. We did one on generations at work and kind of understanding and respecting the different preferences. And, you know, not everyone fits perfectly into one box. There may be a Gen Zer who, you know, really just loves to pick up the phone and talk to you, or vice versa, right? So I think too, it's just really important to have those conversations, like you mentioned, and be open and respectful, and understand that it's going to take some time sometimes to fall into the patterns that work. But I think that, like you mentioned, the communication is just so key there.
Yeah, right.
Great. Well, I think that does it. Last call for questions. We will give one more minute here while I wrap up, but I just, I wanted to say thank you again so much, Kathleen, for taking the time to share your expertise. I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in today, and I want to remind you that the recording from today's webinar will be available on our webinars page at oac.ohio.gov/webinars. Maybe tomorrow, definitely by early next week. So keep an eye out there. And as we mentioned, we'll make a copy of the slide deck available as well. So that does it for today's presentation. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you next time.
Okay. And thank you.